All right. Hey, good morning to you. It's going to be a great day. We had a great night last night. Went and watched some football with my grandson Cole, who's a quarterback and safety at Appalachian. They only have about like 15 players, so they played both ways and played Locust Fort last night. And man, it was good. We lost by touched our extra point, really. But man, what a great game! My boy probably ran for about 100 yards and threw a touchdown pass and scored a touchdown. So it was fun watching Cole play ball. We had a great night. And so anyway, I hope your night was good too. And I'm ready for the day, ready to jump into some truth. And so we're just going to get to it. Man, I'm enjoying shifting gears into Romans chapter 10. Not that we're shifting gears, but we kind of move beyond what is some difficult statements of Paul. And so and now we're jumping into, Paul is still speaking specifically in the bigger book of Romans to the Jews. So as you remember, he started and he's been making a case for how we cannot in any way find righteousness in and of ourselves. He said from the very beginning we couldn't do that. God gave us creation. He gave us his conscience. We rejected that, chose to worship the created thing as opposed to the creator. As a result, our hearts were darkened, and we just stumbled ourselves all into sin. You had some who tried to be more moral than the others and would outwardly do some things. And so chapter 2 says that they would condemn them. And Paul says, you have no right, man. You're as bad as they are. And then he gets to chapter 3 and he reminds the Jews that you had everything going for you. You had the law, you got the covenants, you got the heritage of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You got all of that. And yet you still couldn't do it. And then he begins the great treaty on justification by faith in Christ alone. That's it. That's the only way. And so he marches through that. And then he gets to chapter 8 and he culminates with the whole crescendo of that there's now therefore no condemnation to us who are in Christ. For we have died to sin and we're alive to Christ in him. What shall separate us from the love of Christ, right? We're more than conquerors through him who loved us. Whatever comes our way in this world to attack that faith in Christ, that righteousness is more powerful than anything, any force that could stand against us. And so then he moves into chapter 9, and this is where we are. 9, 10, and 11 is a little parenthesis. So if you're getting a little bogged down in this, don't worry, breathe. We're going to be through it, and then we're going to get to some practical aspects of things. But he's driving home a point that you and me shouldn't miss. He is burdened for Israel. Because they had it all, right? I mean, they had everything, and then they rejected it. And so we see we see Paul lamenting that in the beginning of chapter 9. He consoles himself with the reminder that it was never God's intention for all of Israel, all of the Jews in that sense, to be saved. It was never that intent. And so he gave us that analogy, right? It was Abraham he chose out of all the nation, all the men in the world. And then it was Isaac and not Ishmael or the other brothers. And then it was Jacob and not Esau, right? And so we saw that go down through there. And then we were encouraged with the sovereignty of God, that God is sovereign and in control. And to me, that is the most powerful point in my life practically for just living life. I promise you it's the cure to worry, the cure to stress, to anxiety. I just breathe and soak in the fact that my God has allowed whatever has come into my life this day, some of it by my own choosing, some of it by what others have done, and some of it just the sin principle. Those are the three ways that we find ourselves in trouble. I choose to sin, you choose to sin, and I have to live with the results of it, are just the effects of the system of sin that we live in. And so he reminds us, and I know this, that God, nothing has come into my life that hasn't been sifted through the hand of God. And I use Paul as an example for that with his thorn in the flesh, that messenger of Satan, where Paul cries out three times, seasons of it, man, Lord, take this from me. But God says, I've allowed that. I've sifted that through. That's a good thing. All things work together for good to those that love God and are called according to his purpose. When you're weak, then you're going to be strong. And I want you to understand that my grace is sufficient for you. And so, man, that's how I live life, understanding of a sovereign God, right? And so then Paul gave that great illustration of he He mercies those who he wants to mercy, and he'll harden those who he wants to harden. And while we think, man, that's a hard and fast and literally we have to walk carefully through that, because if you become a proud hyper Calvinist, you're going to end up, there's no other way, but you're going to end up into a fatalist lifestyle and puppets. But if you go the other way, that everything is determined on your own choice, then you lock out the reality that God does what he does. And so there's that tightrope that we walk of theology so that we don't get messed up. So while we can't reconcile those two things in our mind, we know that they're both true. So God mercies and he hardens, but not in some cold, calculated way. God is sovereign like a potter, right? But this is, and what Paul doesn't say in chapter 9, Jeremiah does in his writings in chapter 18 of his, where God, even though he is sovereign, he is the potter, he allows him to respond and relent, right? He will allow himself to respond to us and to relent as a result of our response. So there is a G and a haw, so to speak, in how this thing works. Let me read it to you in chapter 18, then we'll kind of dive into the new stuff. But he says this: Then the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah from the Lord, saying, Arise, go down to the potter's house, and there I will announce my words to you. So I went down to the potter's house, and there he was making something on the wheel. But the vessel that he was making of clay was spoiled in the hand of the potter, right? It's not pure and holy. That's the symbolism. The metaphor is your life and my life. So he made it into another vessel, as it pleased the potter to make. Then the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Am I not able, house of Israel, to deal with you as the potter does, declares the Lord? Behold, like the clay in the potter's hand, so are you in my hand, house of Israel. At one moment I might speak concerning a nation or concerning a kingdom, to uproot it, to tear it down, or to destroy it, right? He may say, I may decide I'm going to take this kingdom and I'm going to fashion it and I'm going to destroy it. If that nation against which I have spoken turns from its evil, then I won't make it what I was going to make it. I will relent of the disaster that I planned to bring on it. Or at another moment, I might speak concerning a nation or concerning a kingdom to build up or to plant it. But if it does evil in my sight by not obeying my voice, and I'll relent the good in which I said that I would bless it, right? And so there is that contrast. I just say that because I think it's so important as we march through theology. We make it sterile, and we lose the reality that we're talking about real people and real lives. And so when we start saying, well, God has commanded some to hell and some to heaven, and while that all may be true in some sense, we can't live there. Now, enough of that. Let's follow out the rest of chapter 9 so we can get to chapter 10. So the Gentiles, he says, choose faith and they're alive. My people, they stumbled over Christ. They chose to keep trying to work, to bring God down, to pull themselves up, right? They stumbled over Christ, that rock of offense, right? Why? Well, he called them out. He called them out on their hypocrisy, on their self-righteousness, on the evil in their hearts. And they couldn't take it. And so they chose the law and said, it's just, we're doing this. And now we come to today in chapter 10, and Paul is saying, hey, my desire is still there. So now he's back to what he was in chapter 9, the very first part. And so here's where we go. Let's see what we can do with this. Brothers and sisters, he says, chapter 10, verse 1, my heart's desire and my prayer to God for them is their salvation. Now, one more note before we leave the Calvinist and the Arminian type thing, because I could lean a lot harder toward Calvinism. I really try to dig. That was something that happened 1,500 years ago. There was truth way before that. And the early fathers and what I believe Paul teaches is exactly what we've been discussing here. And I want you to understand, if it was as though the hard people think it is, why would Paul even pray for their salvation? He would just assume, well, God's going to do what God's going to do. So just another little touch of reminder here. When Paul says, brothers and sisters, my heart's desire and my prayer to God for them is for their salvation. I want to see that. For I testify about them that they have zeal for God. Man, I've been with these people. Listen, in Paul's missionary journeys, right? All three of his journeys. He actually had a fourth one that wasn't recorded in there as he was freed from prison for just a moment, where he went to Spain and went to Ephesus and then found himself rearrested in Rome, where he will lose his head about 57 AD, or 67. So we find ourselves here, and he says, man, and so they were fighting against him in all of his missionary journeys. These guys were hounding him, chasing him. That's how he kept getting into trouble. It was these Judaizers in that sense, those that didn't want to believe the Messiah. They wanted to hold people firmly to the law. He says, man, I've got to tell you, they got a zeal for God. I mean, they don't quit. But it's not in accordance with knowledge. And this is Israel's problem. It's their problem today. For not knowing about God's righteousness and seeking to establish their own. Man, they're so stubborn in their ignorance that they didn't see his greatness. They didn't see how holy his holiness was. They thought, well, we can get there. This is their silliness. But yet the world tries to do the same thing. Well, I'm just hoping my good will outweigh the bad. You hear that a lot. In those who at least believe in God. We're fastly moving to a post-God kind of a society, but right now there are those who feel this same way. They keep reducing God down, and you see the progressives doing that. Man, they're reducing God down to something that's somewhat cozy and convenient for them. But so were the Jews. And so he says in verse 3, man, they kept reducing him down, right? They didn't understand his holiness. And then for not knowing about God's righteousness, seeking to establish their own, they did not subject themselves to the righteousness that is God, right? So they kept reducing God down while working hard to strive to be perfect. That's why you would hear them, do all of the things they would do and fuss at people because they didn't tithe correctly and they didn't bring the right offering and they didn't honor the Sabbath. They were working on the Sabbath and we caught you, and they were running around trying to play little citizen's arrest kind of thing, and it's just wicked. And so he gets to verse 4, he says, for Christ is the end of the law of righteousness to everyone who believes. What's he saying? They didn't know that in Christ the work of the law was ended. It met its match. It's dead end. It stops. It's over. Why? Because according to the scriptures, he is the propitiation for that wage of sin that is death. He satisfied the debt. So it's over. It's gone. That is the keeping of the law and the striving to seek to do that, it's over. The veil was torn when he was on the cross and the burden of your sin and my sin and all the world's sin was upon him. That was when darkness reigned. And that was when the veil was ripped into, right? That barrier that separated the Holy of Holies from the priest. And he says that we're done with, Christ has paved the way. There's now no separation between us. Therefore, the writer of the Hebrews says, let us come boldly before the throne of Christ. Why? Because we have access. We've been given access for this once-for-all sacrifice. Man, when you start knowing the scriptures and bringing them all together, it's just powerful truth. And then he was life-giving. Because he raised from the dead, so you and me can have newness of life. So I don't need to try and keep the law. The law now has been written in my heart. The Spirit of Christ propelling me forward. My goal is simply to die to self, to put to death the old residual effects of the old man, and to move to holiness. I have salvation. I'm no longer destined for hell. I'm destined for heaven. But it's not about behaving till heaven gets here. It's about becoming something. And this is what God has called us to. And so now he comes into verse 5 and he says, now, so you have two choices these days. For Moses writes of the righteousness that is based on the law, that the person who performs them will live by them. And so he quotes, and that is what the command was. Not that it was the end all, but it would be the demonstration to show the people of the world that they cannot attain to the holiness of God in and of themselves. That they just cannot. You and me could never exhaust how holy the holiness of God is. We can turn at sin and everything else. God can't even look upon it. He says, all the best, even the best stuff that you have is like minstrel rags to me, man. He said, it's useless. It's pointless. Just get it out of my sight, right? This is God's attitude towards sin. This is why the wrath of God is being stored up, because it is abhorrent to a holy God to have that. That's why it should be abhorrent to us. That's why when he says, be ye holy, for I am holy, that's what he tells Moses and them. Peter says the same thing. That's why, then so he reminds us, now that the law has ended in us and we are freed from the burden of our sin and the power and the penalty of it, we should be holy people. We're not just saved people. We're not just sinners saved by grace. We're vessels of honor, meant useful to the master's service, that we should always maintain a clean and pure heart, which is precious in the sight of the Lord. This is where we're going, to put away all sin. We don't have time for this anymore. We can't live like the world lives. This is his mantra. But we're here now in verse 5, and he says, for Moses writes of the righteousness that's based on the law. There's a righteousness that's based on the law, but you can't keep it, right? It's about the commands and obedience, right? But you and I can't keep the commands, and we can't obey the commands. We can't. And Paul even said that when he was striving where Israel is now, about wanting to do good, wanting to do the law. But he said, man, but when I saw the law, all it did was magnify sin in my life. I didn't know what coveting was till I saw what the word said, what the law said. And then I thought, man, all I want to do now is covet, right? That's the problem with this righteousness based on law. You always come up short. Reminds me of Sisyphus, right? That myth in Greek mythology. He was the mythological king of Corinth. He had cheated death twice. And so Zeus confines him and assigns him to this sentence of an endless, hopeless pursuit. That's where anyone who thinks they can earn their way to heaven is this hopeless, endless pursuit. Sisyphus, for the rest of his days in eternity, would take this huge boulder, roll it up a hill, knowing that near the end, when he just got it to the top, it was going to roll back down. And the day would start over, and he would do it again. That's all trying to achieve Christ in our own is. It's just that. We can keep trying, but we will never get there. We might can push it a little closer, and we feel like we're getting somewhere, but that ball is going to roll back, given a circumstance, an attitude, a thought, those things. And all of a sudden, man, we're falling back 20 steps, and now we're at it again. That's the life of those who want to seek to earn their way to heaven. And Paul says you can do that, but you will never get there. But the righteousness based on faith, now that's a different thing. You don't have to go on a journey. And he says this, and it's a poem from Deuteronomy. So let's just read it, and then we'll go to Deuteronomy. But the righteousness based on faith speaks as follows: do not say in your heart, who will go up to heaven? That is to bring the Messiah down. Or who will ascend to the abyss? That is to bring the Messiah up from the dead. But what does it say? The word is near you, in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith which we are preaching. I'm not preaching righteousness anymore, not through law. I'm preaching faith. Now, real quickly, in the few minutes we have left, let's go to Deuteronomy, and I want you to hear this. He says this: so it will be when all of chapter 30, verse 1. So it will be when all these things have come upon you, the blessing and the curse which I have placed before you, and you call them to mind in the nations where the Lord your God has scattered you. He's gotten all people together. He's read the law, and he says, now, there's curses and blessings that go with this. And so this is where he is. I promise you restoration, he says, and you call them to mind in the nation when the Lord your God has scattered you, and you return to the Lord your God and obey him with all your heart and soul in accordance with everything that I'm commanding you today, you and your sons, then the Lord your God will restore you from captivity. He said, you're going to do evil, I'm going to send you into captivity. But when you wake up and realize and you turn and you come back, you and your sons, I'm going to bring you back out of that stuff. See, this is the love and compassion of God. He's sovereign in that he knows what's going to take place, but he's loving in that he wants you to come to him. Verse 3, then the Lord your God will restore you from captivity and have compassion on you, and he will gather you again from all the peoples where the Lord your God has scattered you. If any of you are scattered countrymen are at the ends of the earth, from there the Lord will gather you. There's no reach that he can't go. It doesn't matter how far you get away from him. It doesn't matter how scattered that you get. He will find you. This is powerful truth from Jeremiah. If any of your scattered countrymen are at the ends of the earth from the Lord, then they will gather you. And from there he will bring you back. The Lord your God will bring you into the land which your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it, and he will be good to you and make you more numerous than your fathers. Moreover, the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the hearts of your descendants to love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul, that you may live. And the Lord your God will inflict all these curses on your enemies and on those who hate you, who persecuted you. And you will again obey the Lord and follow all his commandments, which I am commanding you today. Then the Lord your God will prosper you abundantly in every work of your hand, in the children of your womb, the offspring of your cattle, in the produce of your ground. For the Lord again rejoice over you for good, just as he rejoiced over your fathers, if you obey the Lord your God, to keep his commandments and his statutes, which are written in the law of the Lord. For you turn to the Lord your God with all your soul. For the commandment, this is where we're getting to. For the commandment which I'm commanding you today is not too difficult to you. It's not so far away. It's not in heaven that you could say, will I go up to heaven for us and get it for us and proclaim it to us that we may follow it? Nor is it beyond the sea that you could say, who will cross the sea for us and get it out of it for us and proclaim it so that we may follow it? On the contrary, the word is near you, in your mouth and in your heart, that you may follow it. That's as far as we're going to get today. Man, I was thinking we'd get further. But how powerful is that? We'll come back and see this tomorrow. I love how gracious God is. Man, Lord bless you guys. I can't wait to share more of this truth with you in the morning.